mics. Push your mic button. Just push it once. Yep. Good evening. Today is October 15th, 2024. It's 7 p.m. General Township Hall. Tonight, 2025 meeting schedule and potential zoning resolution amendment discussion. Staff present this evening: Joe Schaefer, Director of Development and Zoning; Paul Benson, Deputy Zoning Inspector. Roll call to order.
Roll call, Mr. Bernert.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Here.
Mr. Leff.
Here.
Mr. Teichman.
Present.
Mr. Wester.
Here.
And I will note that Mr. Welch and Mr. Graver both informed me they would not be able to attend this evening.
All right, statement of policy: this meeting may be recorded. Such recordings are public record and may be posted online and could be subject to review in court. As is the adopted policy of the Zoning Commission, all applicants will be granted an opportunity to make their formal presentation. The audience may be then granted an opportunity to comment, followed by the applicant's response and questions from the commission. The chairperson may limit repetitive debate and reserves the following rights: to limit comment to items on the agenda, to limit public comment to 5 minutes per person, to restrict the number of times a member of public is permitted to speak, and to enact any other reasonable ad hoc protocols or measures necessary to maintain a fair, safe, and orderly meeting. This policy was adopted by the commission to provide for the respectful, constructive, and efficient discussion of business scheduled for consideration and to allow for proper due process as required by law. First item up, meeting minutes from the last meeting, way back in June.
A motion to approve?
Motion to approve. Second?
Second.
Any discussion? The motion to approve is as presented.
As presented, yeah.
Do you wish to amend your second as presented?
What do you mean by that?
So move to accept the meeting, but it was as presented. We didn't say anything about, so he just remade his motion. Do you want to resecond it?
Second.
Thank you. Call?
Roll call, Mr. Bernert.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Teichman.
Yes.
Mr. Wester.
Yes.
Mr. Leff.
Yes. Meeting minutes accepted. Takes us, what do you want to do? Meeting schedule first?
Fully up to you. Sure. So as is customary, I've gotten you the 25 schedule here in early fall in hopes that we can get it. There's always been sort of a question whether we need to formally pass a motion to adopt it, but the past several years we had, because I think it's just the best practice. I did make a couple changes. Number one, I reduced one column on it to try to just make it a little bit easier to read and fit onto the page. You can see my notes there, basically. The other change was just to some dates due to some conflicts, specifically the potential site walk in April had to be moved back due to Easter, because this office is always closed the Monday after Easter, and then the BZA always meets that Tuesday, so we had to push a little further back than normal. We haven't been getting a lot of site walk applications anyway, so I didn't think it was going to be a huge deal. And then the board, the other week, decided they're going to move their regular meeting nights to the second Tuesday of the month, so the day after you guys meet, which means the October meeting had to get pushed out. I wasn't sure if we should go to, I wrote Veterans Day, but I meant Columbus Day. I wasn't sure if you wanted to go to Wednesday or like the subsequent Monday. The subsequent Monday seemed really late into the month. So I put Wednesday on there knowing that we could always change it if you wanted to. So
That's too late for the November meeting. We need to have
yeah, there's,
revised materials that would.
correct. That was my thought as well. I originally had, I guess that would have been like the 21st or something. I was like, that's really late. So I guess I need to make sure, okay, yeah. And we always know as applications come in, if you need to flex deadline for resubmittal or something, we can do that. So, but yeah, other than that, I think it's pretty straightforward. I didn't know, I mean, Paul, we internally looked at the dates to make sure we didn't miss anything or have any conflicts. We didn't catch anything. Want to make sure you guys didn't see anything that jumped out to you that maybe we missed.
Yeah, Susan and I looked at it. We didn't see any other issues.
Forgot to look at the dates in the plan submission.
I mean, we don't have to do it tonight if you don't want to adopt it tonight. We know we're going to meet in November, so if
Yeah.
you want to just table any kind of adoption to November, that's fine. I'll probably keep this informally in case people start asking about dates into and that's the other reason I try to get it done in fall, is because people will start planning ahead and ask for dates in 25, and I like to be able to tell them, well, this is what I think it's going to be. So I can tell them at least, it's not official, but this is what it's looking like, but it won't be finalized until November. So
Is there any
that works
reason
on our
not to finalize it tonight? Is there any reason we need to curb it?
No, unless you just want to take some time to look at those actual dates.
Did everybody take a look at the dates, make sure it worked schedule-wise?
Yeah, if you're ready, go ahead tonight. We can do that tonight. That would be great.
Is this do we need to formally adopt or make a motion?
You could do, yeah, a motion to adopt the 25 schedule as presented with the understanding, the comment, I won't have the comments on the final draft.
I'll make a motion to adopt the Genoa Township Zoning Commission 2025 schedule as presented with the notion that some minor grammatical changes might be made.
I second.
Comments or discussion? Roll.
Roll call, Mr. Bernard,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Aye.
Mr. Theismann,
Yes.
Mr. Wester,
Yes.
Mr. Leff.
Yes. Meeting schedule adopted. Sweet. All right, let's talk ZR.
It's been a while.
Been a long, long time. Sebastian brought up the fact that we did not cover the last couple chapters. He had a
Correct.
couple of questions and comments, so if you would like to
Wherever you want to start.
just tell us where you would, what page you want to start
Gonna
on.
be Article 26, the first page.
Oh, boy. All right, so that's going to be like,
26.
The page 26-1, I don't know if there's actual page number.
try 400, let's see, 26?
yeah.
I'm there.
Are we on 26, you said?
Yes.
All right, so 26.
260203, that's.
Mm-hmm.
26.
I just had a question if it's like, because it says the chair of the zoning commission or the chair of the township trustees may each reject a submission to their respective entity if the submission is found to be missing required components. My question is the chair of zoning commission, I mean, is that normally you who does it, David?
No, we've never had to actually exercise this.
Well, I know,
it-
but if we just state this in this legal document, if we should
Yeah.
put you in.
Yeah, so we can do this, and this got vetted when we put this language in here.
This
We
isn't
did
that
have a
old.
situation where we thought at the trustee level, were possibly gonna have to do it. But basically how this works, and we've come close one or two other times, but usually is my office gets the materials first. If we see something that's problematic, our job is to immediately contact the chair, and then the chair is charged with making the decision. But yeah, that was all this language was vetted when it got put in.
This is a somewhat recent addition that we did.
Yeah, I think this came in with the last omnibus.
My question is if you legally put this in this document, like, is it you who signs off on this? Like, do you get these requests from Joe and you're the one making this decision, or does Joe make this decision? And then does the text need to be changed accordingly?
I think it's the way we worded it.
The chair makes the decision.
I make the decision, that whoever's in the chair makes the decision at that moment.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one of
Unless
those,
that's the case,
Yeah,
that's
Mark,
fine with me.
Mark was in the position when we originally.
I would flag it, but it would ultimately be up to the chair to make that call.
Okay, that's fine. And then 260207
Mhm.
on the second page, the back of it, the B part. Should there be a time limit? Otherwise, it will be open to a procedure to fall under the better earlier zoning rules. That's my. So basically, applicants can table their application to an uncertain date. Should there be a time limit on this? I know it's an uncertain date, but I mean, you can just start an application in that case and then say like, I'm just gonna finish it at an uncertain date, and then you can wait 10 years, and then you will still fall under the, in generally better conditions of the zoning code, because you will have zoning code from 10 years back.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad idea. I'd want to vet whatever we do. I'd get legally vetted. I don't think it'd be an issue though. So, I mean, you want to put, like we always do for felling development plans, 3 years. So you want to say like, I mean, 3 years still seems like a long time, but, I don't
Could
know,
we
wanna
say
do a year or?
no greater than a year
Yeah.
or a change in the zoning resolution? So they would have to comply with the new resolution, so they couldn't table past it?
Good idea.
Yeah, we could do that. I'm trying to think like, there could be an amendment made that's really insignificant and has no bearing on their application. That's the only,
Well, then
Thought I
you're
had.
just saying if it would apply to their
If it would
application.
apply. So 1 year.
it'd be hard to say if it applied though, because we'd have to reopen the case and some matters would be really cut and dry, but there could be like a really technical change that we don't realize apply, oh, we didn't think about that kind of thing. It's one thing if it's like a density change or something, right? That's obvious.
Yeah.
But there are other changes you could make that we would just never bother to even think about some application that's been sitting on the shelf for 6 months.
So you need to ask Griggs and Fowler together, or?
I probably would I could probably ask Pete.
Okay.
If there's a list of stuff we want to ask legal, I could run it by him. If we do that, I probably would recommend we make that, because I think that tangling language appears in a couple places, that we do that in every location. But I have it makes sense to me.
I mean, most likely this won't happen, but I mean,
Correct.
someone could do this technically.
No, I think, I think you're right to add that. So, I'll try to think of some language there to set a restriction on that.
And basically the same for 27, which is 270108B.
Yeah, wherever it appears,
wherever-
basically do that
wherever
same
tabling
edit wherever
occurs.
that tabling
Yeah.
language appears.
And then further in 27, I just had a question, like, it says that a sidewalk can be requested by the applicants. Can we as a zoning commission request a sidewalk? This is 270201.
Hmm.
B,
In PRD.
yes. I'm just wondering if, because it seems like why would an applicant ever want a sidewalk? It seems like we would find issues. Like,
Well,
why
that's the
can-
idea.
Why, I know, but why would they ever request it? Is it not possible for us to request it?
Before an application's filed, not really.
Okay.
Once an application's filed, that I'm not 100% sure about. Could you, as part of your proceeding, I'd probably always recommend against it because it'd be a public meeting and it becomes a matter of advertising and parking and, I mean, the ones we did before were always sort of a challenge for those same reasons, accessibility.
Mhm.
We have an agreement signed that we're never going to hold a public meeting in a non-accessible site again after my predecessor made a mistake regarding that matter. But before an application, no, we can't just say, hey, we're going to go walk
I mean,
some property, but.
sometimes people bring something up and say like, hey, you should see this, there's a lot of standing water there, and then, like, we either take their word for it, or, like, I mean, it would be handy if we could just walk it then, in that case.
At
And-
that point, the burden, like, what I would tell that person is if you can provide proof of that, then please provide proof of that. Like, the burden to prove their testimony is on the person giving the testimony at that point. You're just gonna say, okay, you said there's water on there, but unless you provide me proof, I just have to sort of take it as a verbal.
So
Word.
we could basically never request a sidewalk except if the applicant would be allowing us to.
I think it'd be tricky. I'm not saying you couldn't ever do it as part of an application proceeding. I think I believe I've heard of those types of things happening before, possibly more in BZA cases than zoning commission cases. I think there are better routes to probably get a lot of the evidence a site walk would try to get you, though.
Okay. Just a question.
I don't think because it doesn't necessarily appear in here, doesn't necessarily preclude you from, if the law allows you to do it, I'm not sure you'd be precluded from doing it, just because it doesn't explicitly say it in here.
And I have 270303E.
Mm-hmm.
270303E,
303.
which is about divergences.
Yes.
For me, it's like, sometimes some sections of our code have like so many subsections, and then they will change multiple things in those subsections, but they still see it as one divergence. Like how do we count these divergences? That's like, sometimes it's easy, it's like a little section, but sometimes it has like A to H subsections, and they change a lot of things in each subsection. That's like, actually you have 6 divergences and they will list one because it's that one 270303 or something. Like, I just like wonder how that's counted.
I don't think there's an exact reason for it. I mean, there's been times I've told applicants, because these 3 sections basically say the same thing, you can list them all in one divergence. Because the idea is, at the end of the day, I mean, it all depends on, each commission member is going to view that topic differently. Is the number important to one commission member, maybe a different answer to another commission member? Some people view it as, what's the gist of the request? Some people would see it as, I don't care how many times it gets repeated in the code, because that's almost inflating the number of divergences. If it's that standard repeats 3 different times, if they're really just asking for one thing, it's somewhat of a just, is the glass half empty or is the glass half full kind of thing. So I think that's somewhat up to the commission of determining, are you okay with them lumping them all together? Do you want to see them all itemized? Like Olive Branch, we ran into that with Olive Branch. That was probably a really good example. There were times I told them, all of this is basically talking about the same concept. You're trying to move the building closer to the road. That's what all these standards talk about. So to me, it made sense to just document them all in a row, because on my end, it's not so important the number of divergences as it is making sure we catch all those sections so the record is clear that, yes, we give them permission not to follow that code section. Legally speaking, there's also the question of, even if you don't necessarily document the divergence, just because maybe you miss it, but you approve the plan, there probably is a good standing argument that you looked at the plan and you were generally okay with the plan, and the matter that it required a divergence was somewhat of a academic sort of fact. So I think it ultimately comes down to each commission member and just how the commission wants to handle it on almost a case-by-case basis. It become very monotonous if you try to list all of them, especially if they're repeating the same thing. And I don't want to, at some point, I mean, on one hand, you do want the applicant to show I'm needing relief from all these code sections, but on the other hand, it's like, yeah, but are we just trying to set it up? I don't want to ever make an applicant feel like we're setting them up either, when really we're just trying to focus on the idea and the concept as opposed to each individual line item. So I don't know, I think that's probably a better item for the commission to discuss on how you want to approach that issue.
This tends to be pretty standard for most zoning commissions around the area, whether it's Columbus or other jurisdictions where you need to create a specific list of the divergences. I understand your comment about, if I'm only asking for a divergence of this tiny part of that entire section, it looks like I'm asking for more than I'm asking.
I think it's more the opposite I'm saying. I'm saying you have a big section and you have a divergence on point A, point C, point H, okay? And then they say it's one divergence, but there are so many subpoints.
Right.
And that's a little bit because how our code is set up would have been better if it by itself were all separate issues. That's just, sometimes it's, like sometimes one little section is like 4 lines, I get that, but sometimes it's almost a page long or 2 pages long. And it still seems like, oh, because it's subsection 270303, it's one divergence.
Right.
It just, I mean, I know it's not a quantitative kind of thing, but like with applications, like a recent application, because we cannot really speak about application in particular, but then it seems like there's a lot of divergences.
Right. Yeah, I remember. Is it simple as changing the wording here from said list shall be itemized in numerical order and shall cite the specific section or relevant subsection numbers? Does that help? I don't know what a solution would be. It's also fairly clear, it says you have to write their verbatim requirements and then write what you're proposing in lieu of that requirement.
I guess to me, at the end of the day, to me, the big picture is, do you understand what they're requesting relief from, and do you know what all the section numbers they need relief from? Whether we list them as 10 divergences or 5 and group some of those section numbers together, again, is a little bit of, I think, just sort of a matter of personal preference.
I agree with that, but
Because you still can see how many section numbers are still being requested. It's just, like I said, you sometimes can, like, I don't mind talking about Olive Branch because it's done, the board approved it. Olive Branch had like, what, 8 or 9 or something? But, and we listed, and that was with some of them combined. But and if you recall in the memo, I boiled it down, it's like, okay, yeah, there's maybe up to 10 of them here when you saw it. But it really boiled down to about 5 issues. because some of them was like the same requirement, just worded slightly different, or the requirement was 75 feet here or 100 feet here. The gist of it was they want to move the building a lot closer to the road. The gist of it was the parking lot needed to be a lot closer to the road. They didn't have room for the landscaping, all the landscaping, those kinds of things. So I think it's just how each, comes down to really ultimately how each commission member processes and prefers to just see it laid out. And what I usually tell them is if like the code section's really closely related, like A and B, I'll tell them just put A and B. Because like, you're basically having to ask for both of the, you can't ask for one or the other. Like, you're having to ask for both because they're so tightly related to one another. So, but I mean, if you want them to list each of those code sections as individual divergences, I think the commission has the right to request an applicant do that.
I think it's general in nature enough now that if we did get down to that and we were in a hearing and we wanted to see itemized, then we asked for it at that point.
Yeah,
But
no,
I don't mind the way.
I agree, just my perspective of this was like, sometimes they bring it up themselves, oh, it's only 3 divergences, and it's like, that's a way you count divergences. Sometimes it's, in my perspective, 5 or 6. It just,
Yes.
the way how you perceive it.
Yeah.
That was just a note. This was something on 270304. So you request paper sizes. I was just wondering if it's not better to ask for a scale. I mean, you want to measure this, right? Because you said you didn't have a computer software to measure things on. Wouldn't you rather have a standardized scale so you can easily measure things?
I mean, we certainly could put that they need to beat the scale on there. Candidly, the 24 by 36s are occasionally helpful when like there's a lot going on in the drawing and the print's really small and we can blow it up. But a lot of times if we get on PDF, I can blow it up on the PDF anyway.
My thing is just like, in
But if-
generally,
to your
they ask for a
point-
scale, because
Mhm.
then if you're in your office, you can, in some scales, you can easily measure out what it is. If it's only that little, like the scale, which is the drawn scale, it's very hard to sometimes figure out what.
Yeah, and
what
I
the
can
size
measure
is.
the straight lines are easy enough to measure. What you really can't measure is you've got this multi-sided polygon open space. Can I really verify that that's
Yeah, I get
7 acres? I'm not gonna be able to do that.
I mean,
I look at it and assume, okay, yeah, that looks like 7 acres, that seems like a reasonable number. I mean, a surveyor eventually is gonna have to certify it, and I have to approve the subdivision permit. If they came in with a subdivision permit and 7 acres all of a sudden dropped down to 3, there's some room for survey correction when I get those. I always know those numbers are gonna flex a little bit. But if like, there was like a rapid drop like that, it'd be like, well, this isn't consistent with the numbers we approved. Like, you either got a surveying problem or you got a development plan problem. So I think it would somewhat regulate itself, but I don't think there's an issue with saying, include drawings to scale, just adding to scale somewhere in that. I don't know exactly where to add it in that sentence, just looking at it, but I'm sure there's a way I could fit that in there.
I mean, is there a good scale, Matt, that you think would be best to work at?
Well, the challenge I've always experienced is when there is a prescribed scale.
Oh.
Because some sites are so big,
Well,
and
yeah.
if you get,
That's what I have with this problem. If
Right.
you have a big scale, big site, you also have to get it on this little paper.
right,
That's
right.
why I'm like, should the paper dictate what it should be?
Well, if we put a scale on there, do they have to submit a divergence if they don't meet it?
I mean, technically, yes.
I like.
Necessarily catch it, I don't know.
To scale, because it allows the scale appropriate to whatever it is they're proposing.
That was my thought, is just put it to
Long as
scale,
it
whether
has a
it's
scale.
1 to 20 or 1 to 40 or 1 to 60. It
Right.
really, like you said, it really depends on the scope of what the drawing's trying to cover. And one page might be one, another page might be another. Now, if you want to say, I don't want to see it any bigger than X, we can do that, but I would pick a pretty high number.
Drawing to scale.
been my
Drawing to
preference.
scale.
Drawing to scale.
Okay, I'll find a way to put that language in there.
And I mean, just a question for you, Drew. Would you not want to request from the trustees to have software you could actually easily measure this on? I mean, that cannot be super expensive for one computer to run CAD software on, so you can get this file on I mean, one computer.
Yeah.
I mean,
I just don't think there's a need that warrants the expense, to be honest.
okay.
Plus, you've got a county engineering office who has the software and would have to review it anyway from an engineering drawing
Okay,
perspective.
well, okay. If they review it, then it's fine, I guess.
Again, it's got to go
Yeah,
through a
yeah.
two-step process, so preliminary
Yeah.
versus the final, it's gonna come back at final, and we're gonna have scale no matter what.
Yeah.
County engineering's gonna review it.
Yeah.
If it needs to be
So-
platted, it's gonna go through the platting process. There's a lot of eyes that get put on it besides just mine.
Okay, okay.
I mean, in an ideal world, if money was no object,
No, I mean.
I'd
and
love to
even-
buy a program that could analyze all the drawings for me and flag all the problems. I just type the report. Might put me on a job, but.
Right, but I mean, even in the worst-case scenario, you've got a GIS system as a part of the county auditor site that you can go click
yeah.
on it, and it tells you the GIS basic,
Yeah,
here's what this lot is. So.
yeah, you're right.
Always having a drawing to scale is a good idea, though, just
Yep.
Yeah.
for us,
No, I
when we look at it and see how far things actually are.
We just printed out something today from like 1995 and we're like, wow, we really, there was a scale on
Yeah,
here.
I mean, okay, so let's bring up all.
There was a scale, but the drawing wasn't on the page to scale.
Right, and then even like Olive Branch, again, we'll bring them up, is we asked for certain measurements from certain points that they didn't even have. It's easy for them to add it, so,
Yeah.
yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Drawing to scale, I like that
Okay.
idea. Okay,
And I'll make sure if that appears anywhere else that I get that in
Okay.
there.
Then 270422,
270422.
which is about the longevity of approval.
Got it. Yep, in there.
I think we talked about this before, if it should be 3 years. I don't know if there was a legal standpoint that it had to be 3 years for. I don't know if you can talk about that, Joe? 3 years just seems a lot because this is for the preliminary and then you get another 3 years for your other one, your final development plan. I mean, same argument, you can start the application, sit on it 3 years, a lot changed. I mean, since I've been on here, the zoning code changed dramatically.
I don't think that's necessarily like a legal requirement standard. I think that number did appear in the prior version of the resolution that we've been, not, I mean, I think possibly even before my time here, so I think it's been a long standing number. I've always been hesitant to shorten time too much because all it takes is something like a pandemic to blow up, and then you've got a whole backlog of stuff that you gotta deal with because you had a time frame that was just
But you-
unrealistically short.
But you do get an extension period too, so.
If the board is so willing to grant it. I mean, we've only had to exercise, the 3-year clause, in my 10 years of being here, we've used once with the
I know.
most recent one. So like, again,
That one got extended.
oh,
1
can we
year.
change it? Yeah, do I think going a lot shorter makes a lot of sense? No, because I think we're gonna end up sort of shooting ourselves, that's not the right phrase.
I mean, on,
I don't want to make it too short and then create just more sort of unnecessary work for everybody.
besides that one, what was the longest one besides that?
Glade at Highland Lakes, which I think took years to, because it got rezoned and sat and sat and sat and sat. And then got sold, and then someone else came in and did the final
My
on
thing
it.
is this, it also seems fair to, unfair to property owners next door, right? They're like, hey, this project, it's started, they're like sitting there not knowing what's gonna happen. Like, why, I would just make it 2 years. I mean, I know these projects take longer to put in place. And just get a year off, you can always extend it, so.
I mean, even if we change this, the rezoning's permanent. So even if the preliminary development plan goes void, like you rezone something to PRD and the preliminary development plan goes void, the PRD zoning still remains. You cannot revoke that PRD zoning. That's why it's so important that when you rezone it, that you're really sure that that's the zoning classification you're okay with, because I always try to tell people this. The preliminary development plan is just an idea of what we think is gonna happen there. It is not a commitment. They could come in with a final development plan that looks 100% different. So I guess to me, that's why it's somewhat of a moot point, because if they just let it go void, they're either gonna A, come back and do another preliminary development plan, or B, they're gonna
But
try to race the clock and submit a final development plan, even if it's radically different than what the preliminary plan was.
the code might change in the meantime.
Correct. I mean, we're on average, I guess I can't predict how many times the code's gonna change in the future. We're averaging about one a year lately. Some big, some small.
Other comments?
No.
For
And
me,
we can
it's-
go to
for
two, I
me,
mean,
2 seems more reasonable to me, because you can always come and ask for an extension. But it's up to you guys on the board, what your opinion is. of course.
what's the problem we're trying to solve?
It's not, it's some of these, I mean, there's not that many, but sometimes you have these property owners that sit next to a property, like probably the one that we will get next week, and there is a lot of worry about what's gonna come there, and if there is nothing resolved in that time, it's just sitting there, and you just get owners that get not that happy.
but to
And,
that,
and in theory, also a developer can come in, say, I'm gonna do this, sit on it for 3 years, then finally maybe get an extension for a 4th or maybe even 5th year, because that technically you can do that up to 3 times, I think. And then do a totally different plan, but in the meantime, your code can be changed 2, 3 times. I mean, and then you still will have the old zoning, and to me, it always feels unfair, because everyone who's gonna be around is going, oh, but no, the new codes, because you hear it all the time with people coming in here, oh, no, the new code says this, yeah, sorry, they're not falling under the new code, they're still allowed to do the old code, and then you get people who gonna get upset to us, even though it's like not our fault, but.
you will encounter pushback from at least one attorney I know. If he was here in the room, he would say, and we've always had this disagreement, and we've always sort of had just a gentleman's agreement on how we're gonna handle it. At least one attorney we deal with always says that they are entitled to the zoning resolution for the final event plan as it existed at the time the preliminary plan was approved. I'm not sure I agree with that assessment, but I'm not an attorney. And so what we've always had them do is ask for a divergence to basically say, we understand that your final's gonna be, and we just did it, I think Mira Luna, we did it. So I think you could potentially set yourself up for some pushback there. I mean, even if you set it at 2 years and goes void and we don't approve it, you're still gonna have property owners sitting next to a PRD zone property that they have no idea what's gonna happen to it.
On top of that, acquisition of land, getting through engineering, getting through multiple design elements. 1 year is way too short and unrealistic. 2 is, I would think, borderline. 3 absolutely would be, I think, okay, but 2 might be tightening schedules a little much.
Okay. Well, if we do keep it at 3, maybe we should just get the extensions less then. I mean,
So I thought we changed extensions to 1 extension only in 1 year.
I thought
Wasn't that, am I remembering that wrong,
wasn't it
Joe?
not like 36 months?
I thought it was an extension of one year only, because we,
Here on,
I thought we
here,
changed
if you read on point E on the next page, point 3, it says, not exceed 36 months.
Not more than 12, yeah.
the request for an extension shall be no more than 12 months from the date of the preliminary development plan expires.
But in cumulative,
be
you
no
can't
limit.
ultimately end up asking for more than 36.
Okay.
So you could ask for 10, 10, 10, 6, but then you'd be at 36. And then you'd be capped out. But that's why we reserve that power to the board, because if they feel like, no, and that's why we put some of those standards of review in for the trustees to look at, of if the code does change, then the board has, the trustees have the authorization to say, no, we're not extending it. I mean, I worked in a prior community that they had a PRD that was ongoing, now had broken ground part of it. Gosh, when I left, it still hadn't finished, and it had started in like 2003. I mean, that happens. A lot, but it happens.
I know, but we're also talking about preliminary. It's not like, hey, we're working on it.
Yes, that is a key difference for sure.
So Sebastian, are you asking then to limit it to one-year extension, or a
That's-
grand
I mean, if
total
you
of
wanna
12
keep-
months
I
extension?
think if you want to keep it at the 3 years that it will be still active for, I would only allow them one extension, definitely for a preliminary plan.
We're thinking 4 years. You could get,
So total. Joe, do you see a problem with that? Especially after granting the last extension, there was pretty much a commitment that it would only be done once, I think if I remember correctly from the hearing.
That was the directive for that one. Whether I could say that that's how the board would feel about other ones, I don't know. I think there's such unique circumstances, I'm not sure you could say that would be the theory that carries out. Also, the boards will change over the years. You may have a board that says, no, I'm not comfortable at all. You may have a board that says, oh, yeah, it all really just depends on, it's so open-ended. It really just depends on the unique circumstances that exist with that development plan at that time, what's going on with the market, what's going on in the world, who's sitting in the chairs. I think that's why we sort of left it up to trustees to determine as they see fit. Now, if we want to, I mean, I guess if we want to say, I'd rather go down to 2 and keep the 1236 language as opposed to 3 and saying you can only get one more extension.
Fine with me too.
I mean, if we're wanting to change it, I'm fine with it as is too, but.
it takes you more than 2 years to get a plan going. That's cutting it tight. And if you go to 2 years and then say you gotta apply for an extension at that point, I think in 3 years, you should have everything in a row. And if it's not quite there, no matter what the economic or social conditions are, another year granted would probably work on a prelim. This is just the beginning, as I'm understanding it. So,
Yeah, this is just the deadline for you to file your final application.
Right.
so I don't see why you have to have 3 or 6 years out there on a preliminary. It doesn't make sense to me.
So what are you proposing? What do you think?
Like Sebastian was saying, is either if you do the 3-year, give them a 1-year
Okay.
option, or if we do 2, you can roll a little bit more into it. But I think 3 years upfront is probably fair.
Now you got a comment?
Personally, I like the 3 years as is. I think it takes a while to develop, especially if it's a really large property. It's just not the development of it, it's engineering, it's getting all the permitting if they have to, work through that. But extending for an extra, what are we looking at? An extra year or extra 2 years
Max
after
of
that?
3 years.
Well, right now
Max
it's
of 3 years?
It's a 3-year with an extension of 3 in 1-year increments. Well, could be
You could ask for the
Yeah,
full
the-
3 up
You
front.
could ask full 3 upfront.
So is there a problem with the way it's done now, though?
The reason why I bring this up is because when it does happen, it always, the owners surrounding that property always kind of contentious about the trustees or the zoning commission granting that extension. It seems like some kind of unfairness, because it's like, hey, they had this time, oh no, now we're giving them another so much time.
So should we just do 3 years? And then if we need to shorten the extensions, we could do that? So the
I mean-
default is 3, but
I
then
mean,
less
that's
extensions?
fine with me too. Like, I'm for 3 in 1 year, but.
3 and 1.
I think 3 and 1 year seems appropriate.
Fair, I agree.
You feel okay about that, Joe? From an implementation
I mean,
standpoint?
like I said, we've only done it once. I'm always a big fan of flexibility on the township's end. And I don't like to put ourselves in a situation where we're just creating work just for the sake of
So is
creating work.
flexibility to you to be able to extend it to 3 years?
What's that?
Is it 3 years extension, the extension once for every 3 years? Is that the flexibility you're talking about?
So as written right now, preliminary approval is valid for 3 years, flat out.
Okay,
And then basically, once it says is, if you reach the end of that 3 years, or I guess even before that technically, you could start requesting an extension for no more than 12 months from the date the preliminary development plan expires. So you couldn't ask for the full 36 months up front. You could only ask for up to a year.
Up to 1. Yep.
But you basically could only do that up to 3 times, because you can't go higher than a cumulative 36.
okay.
You could ask for less than 12 months, and I suppose do it more times, but you still would get capped at that 36. So that's the theory. I mean, if we want to cut down 36 to 24, that makes sense to me. I mean, if you want to go 2 years and no more than 24 months, that maybe that's a good middle ground. I mean, that's still ultimately, at the end of the day, 4 years. That's still, I'd like to think if you're not building it within in 4 years, you haven't come for final in 4 years, you're probably not doing it, but.
I'd rather advocate for less paperwork. So if we can do 3 years and 1 year extension, to me, that's better than 2 years and 2 1-year extensions. And then that's more approvals that we have to give.
It's also like, it's just how it's perceived, right? Because every time you do an extension, it's just like, they're giving him another extension.
Right.
Instead of like, you have 3 years, instead of doing 2 years and then giving 2 extensions, I'd rather do 3 years and then 1 extension.
But you're not obligated to give them the extension either.
Well, no,
So
I
It's gonna be
know.
totally at the board's discretion. So if they're like, no, we're not doing it, then they're not gonna get it.
I mean, that's true.
I mean, so we should always keep in mind, that's not like an automatic.
Right. Yeah, good point.
It could be 3 years and the board could say, we're not entertaining extensions, we're not comfortable with it for whatever reason. You know, we tried to give them some more guidelines to work with than they had prior. And I think code changes was one of the things we cited in it.
So when something hangs out there for 3 years, what kind of communication are they in with you, Joe?
If it's hanging out for 3 years, I probably haven't heard a lot. I mean, like I said, we've only seen this once in my 10 years here. Most of them don't get it done much quicker than that. They want to get it done much quicker than that. What this really does is it tries to anticipate, you get another COVID, you get another 2008, and everything grinds to a halt. It's trying to build in that flexibility to try to, you know,
But to be fair, if you have a project sitting for 5 years, the economy changes, the needs change, products change. Like you probably want to come back with a new preliminary plan after a long period of time anyway.
or you could just file for a final
But
and
they've
show
just
something
gotta be the
different.
final.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, yeah.
It's a bit of a risk to do that.
Yeah.
but-
I mean, yeah, you can just go into final and then you get another 3 years to work on that.
And the fact that it's can only be 12 months and it's got to go to the board for them to approve it, for them to even entertain it, it does offer the most flexibility.
That's the thought process. If there's a really good reason for it, you would like to think your board would say, yeah, we understand there's a huge economic crisis, kind of thing makes sense. Especially because the township may be in a different position where maybe they need that development and maybe they don't want to be, so, at some point, you don't want to be too difficult in terms of getting that. Circumstances could change. So I would just never want to tie our hands too tightly or anyone else's hands too tightly. I mean, I respect the neighbors aren't going to know what's going on, but again, if someone was calling me with that concern, I'd be like, the PRD zoning remains regardless of whether the development plan is moot or not. So barring someone downzoning back to its original zoning, assume it's going to be some sort of planned residential development at some point. They would have to come, knowing that they would still have to file a final development plan application at some point, and that will go through a public process, and it'll all be very well known. I'm not sure we can ever totally reduce or eliminate the uncertainty of when's this land next to me, when is construction actually gonna start. I think that's just something I think that's beyond our control to some degree. But like I said, if we feel like we need to shorten it up, tighten it up a little bit, I just don't wanna be too tight with it, because I think that I think that can sort of backfire on us. And then we're all sitting here in a meeting, be like, why are we here talking about this? Like, why didn't we just bake this into the original approval or have the code read differently? Because what if the code doesn't change? And now you're just in front of here just because you have to be, just because it's been 3 years.
I mean, it's just like any other development gets maybe 3 years in the township, but this gets twice that because you have 2 processes. That is why I don't think.
Only if the board approves it, though.
No, I get that, but
So I'm not sure,
that's just a long period of time.
and
I
that's
don't
the
see why-
testimony
I
the
d- I
board
just
would
don't
have to
see why the
consider.
preliminary needs to be that long. That's my.
If they go through engineering and engineering flags something really major they've got to deal with, that could really drag it out. You know, all of a sudden it's I know one road project that got delayed over a year because there was evidence there might be an endangered rattlesnake somewhere. Turns out it wasn't there, but it took a year to study to determine, oh, no, there actually isn't an endangered rattlesnake here. Should they get penalized for that whole year over something that really was beyond their control? I mean, that's just an example. And again, that was a road project, not a development, but that kind of stuff can happen.
I like 3 and 1.
I mean, can we make a motion to change it to that?
I don't think we're at the point where we need any
wouldn't
motion.
be a
Well, I
motion.
know, but I mean, can we, as the commission, request this?
I'll write whatever the consensus of the commission is.
We have a 3 and 1.
I don't know why we're changing it.
Don't change it.
I'm good with 3 and 1. I mean,
3 and 1.
That's fine with me.
Well, we got 3 for 3 and 1. I was gonna lean your way and not change it at this point, just because it's in 12-month increments, but
Would 2 and 24 be a compromise?
no, I think that's too short in the beginning.
Okay.
I
I was.
don't like the 2 in the front.
Yeah, I agree. 2 sounds almost too, I agree. 2 almost sounds too
Yeah.
short.
Knowing what people have got to get through, and especially if you run into an environmental issue or this rattlesnake or something else pops up, all of a sudden they've got to do extra work. So
All right, so we want to go to 3 and 1?
3 and 1,
Yep. Can do. You want me to do that in every place we see that language?
yes.
Got it.
All right.
And then just one question still, it's kind of similar, it's at 270619. And the question is, once we approved the final development plan, what's their, like,
I'm sorry,
They-
what
they
was the
would-
number? I was still making my
sorry,
note.
2706-19.
yes.
Got it.
So the question is, I know that they have a minimum to start this project, 3 years, they can get extensions, but what if they just do, hey, we're gonna put this one house here and then we're gonna sit on it for 10 years? I mean, this is purely hypothetical, but they just don't finish the project, just holding on to it and then eventually.
Yeah, it becomes a zombie subdivision. That I don't think the township really would have much recourse on. At that point, the engineered improvements, streets, stormwater would all be bonded.
Mhm.
If they didn't complete those, and they're not bonded through the township, they're bonded through the county. The
Okay.
county could seize the bond and complete the work. I've known of that, I think, happening once. But if everything's done and like all the bonded work's complete and they build one house and the market tanks and the development goes belly up, you're gonna just be stuck looking at it. I mean, it'll suck for
But
us
they-
because we'll be sitting there, at some point, we'll have to maintain, like, I really hope that never happens because someone's gonna get stuck maintaining streets and does it become a public nuisance and stuff? I don't know, but, I mean, I don't think you could revoke their development plan at that point if they just walked away from it. I mean, that's happened before, not here, but I mean, especially after
I mean,
COVID, you saw a lot of zombie subdivisions, especially out west. That was a big
Your
story.
recourse is issuing a building permit and making sure they comply with the other things, so.
But if they can't sell the lots, like, I can't compel them to sell
Yeah,
lots.
You can't compel to sell lots.
Their developments, they own the property, they can do what they want with the property as long as it complies with zoning, so.
But if they want a building permit and they haven't put the trees in and they've done other maintenance, then
Yeah, if there's a public
Those are things,
interest
yes.
in the infrastructure or the maintenance, but if they just don't build most of the lots and they just sit there and they own them but never build on them, that's sort of their right, to be honest.
But they
Yeah.
do need to build the roads and the infrastructure? Or,
That's, the engineer would end up dealing with that.
okay.
Or we'd end up having to get an attorney involved and say, we've got some sort of public
Yeah.
nuisance situation here. That'd be a very extraordinary situation that I'm not sure the zoning resolution probably is in the best position to deal with.
you know, you let
I was
surety
wondering.
and bonding take care of that along with the requirements, so we stay out of that.
The way, there's gonna be no one to go after.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was it.
Those are good comments, Sebastian. All right, anybody else have any other things they wanted to bring up? Joe, you want to talk about regional planning and
Yeah, so you got the regional planning comments. Most of them made sense. I did have to call Scott for clarification on a few of them, and then he explained sort of where they were coming from, and they made sense. So what I've sent you is my red line responses to each of them. Do you want me to just go through each one quickly, or was there
Yep.
stuff you wanted to talk about?
No.
Okay. I'll just go through them one by one. Some of them are more time-consuming than others. The first comment's pretty easy. You know, we use the term Ohio Revised Code a lot of times. Are there situations where we could just use ORC instead? Yeah, probably. I can hunt through and find those situations and easily clean that up. Not a big deal. Add the description of any one to the top of page 5.4. So this had to do with the subscript in the use table. The challenge here is with the way, it's a challenge of how Word functions. I can't put that subscript at the top of each one of those pages unless I delete that entire table and recreate it and put that, basically make an individual table for each one of those pages. Because I can't stick it in the header, because the header is what holds all that stuff that says Article 5 and the page numbers and all that stuff.
Do you have publisher?
What's that?
Do you have publisher?
I do have Publisher. I'm not super familiar with Publisher.
You might be able to import, export back into Word out of publisher to see if that actually would work.
Yeah, I didn't think about that, but yeah, possibly.
You definitely.
Or
do
I could,
want-
I could paste it into Publisher afterwards.
Could.
But then you always have to remember to do that every time you make an amendment.
Right. But if you make multiple charts, it's gonna mess. you
And that
change
was
one
my,
thing,
and the reason it's all one table is, I was adding uses, it was just automatically creating all the columns and rows I needed, and it was just bumping stuff down, so it was somewhat automating itself.
I don't think this is an issue.
Right.
It's one table, it's listed as one table. Yes, it extends multiple pages, but all the subscripts are included on it as part of the one table. They don't need to be on every single page. That's standard for building code, other
Okay.
zoning ordinances.
That was sort of my recollection of it too, but I wanted to make sure we talked.
You
about
okay
it.
with that?
Oh, Matt. Yeah.
You okay with
Oh,
it?
yeah, yep.
It's, I mean, it's right.
All right, don't put the effort into publisher then.
Okay. 703.10.4 was just a simple word deletion, so not even worth talking about. I'll make that change. 705.07 is more just a formatting issue. Do you want non-conforming and non-conformities to have a hyphen in it or not have a hyphen in it? Do you care? You want me just to pick one and go with it?
Yes.
Which one is in the document now?
I think they both appear. I think that's what they're trying to point out, is we use it interchangeably. Does it matter to you? I did ask them to look at formatting stuff like this, because I said, you know, big or small, tell me what you find, so we can,
Then put the hyphen in.
okay.
I agree.
I agree, yeah.
I think that looks better, probably. Use the one with the hyphen?
Yep, use the one with the
got it.
hyphen.
Will do. Uh, 80101, we use the term urban area in the intent and purpose section of the suburban residential district. It's not a defined term because, to me, the intent and purpose section is not an enforceable section of the document. It's sort of just a preamble that says, this is why the regulations you're about to read exist. If we want to maybe provide a little bit more context to it, I threw out a text change we could make, but I don't think we need to add urban area necessarily to the definitions section unless we started using it as a regulatory term. But we're not using it as a regulatory term. It's more of just a descriptive fluff word, for lack of a better phrase.
So where would you want to, if you wanted to add incorporated or municipal, where would that go? Then? In lieu of urban, or
What's that?
instead of urban, you would use those other
No,
two
I
terms? or-
think,
okay.
let me take a look. It made sense when I was looking at it, so I need to.
80101. That's like way back.
Like before the word urban areas. So medium density located contiguous to incorporated urban areas or municipal urban areas. To make it clear, like we're talking about essentially about Westerville.
Joe, is incorporated or municipal defined?
No, we would just fall back in the dictionary. Frankly, now that I think about it, though, I'm not sure I love that term either, because you could have an urbanized area in Genoa that isn't incorporated. Some areas are more dense than others, some areas, like the census Bureau would say some portions of Genoa are classified as urbanized areas. So I think it's somewhat left loosey-goosey on purpose because it is supposed to be a little bit up to the township to determine what it feels like are urban areas. So to some degree, it may be of our benefit to leave it a little bit open-ended, again, because it's not a regulatory standard. I didn't see this as a big issue, but like I said, I asked them to flag everything they saw, so this is one of the items.
I'd leave it alone. Anybody? Feel different? Okay.
80402, simple grammatical change, I'll make that fix. 90301, for acreage required, what if they are adjacent to a land already zone PRD? I thought this was sort of an interesting point. So my recommended solution was to provide some sort of clarification in the text. I haven't drafted it, but I was thinking something along the lines of the 25 acreage requirement is exclusive to the parcels that are proposed for a singular plan development.
So this is in case that someone wants to attach it to another PRD?
That you can't take credit for like existing PRD and what's technically a separate
Yeah.
plan development
Yeah.
towards your acreage requirement. You can't, let's say you're building, let's just pick a random PRD, Highland Lakes.
Mhm.
And you want to build next to, you want to do a new PRD next to Highland Lakes. You can't like
Yeah.
say, well, Highland Lakes next to me is, if you take that in consideration with mine, I'm over 25 acres. Like, no, that's not what we
Yeah.
intended. 25 acres is exclusive to your proposal, not 25 acres cumulative of the entire
Yeah.
area that's already built. So,
Seems reasonable.
Yep.
all right, we'll do that. I'll figure out exactly how to slot that in. But I think we all sort of understand the gist of what I'm trying to get at there. 90309C, should we just defer to county engineer standards since we somewhat do that in the item E below that? The county is allowing for 20-foot with open ditch currently. We have 22. I recommend actually going with what their RPC's recommendation, deleting the 22-foot requirement and letting the language in sub E basically speak to your street width requirement is whatever the county says it's going to be. I mean, unless we've got a really good reason to make them go bigger, which I don't know why we would, because it's just more linear feet that we've got to plow, maintain, and rebuild when it's time to repave. So let the engineering folks sort of do their thing. It's sort of my thought process on that.
What do we say about parking on one side of the street, though?
They have standards for all that.
Okay.
If you're doing parking on one side of the street, they make you build it to this width. If you're doing parking on both sides of the street, it's got to be to this width. They've got cross sections for all that.
Okay.
90310B. Minimum sidewalk widths, we have 4. RPC's recommending maybe we go to 5. I don't have an issue with that. I guess it looks like federal highways moving to 5, with 4 being acceptable in just certain situations, so I'm fine with 5.
Okay.
I know some places that require you to do 6, so 5 still seems fair to me. 120302B, does this mean a divergence would be necessary if less than 300 feet? Or does the engineer's office approval dictate the distance? I thought this was sort of a good comment. I mean, they're all good comments, but this one in particular, I thought we did want to take a closer look at. Because I do think we could provide some clarification, because otherwise it's somewhat up to interpretation. I recommend that we add text that makes it clear that a divergence is not required in instances where the county engineer has authorized a shorter distance. We're saying 300 feet, and I got that 300 feet from the county engineer. But if they're saying, oh, because of these circumstances, we're willing to entertain 275, is there a reason to make them get a divergence because we said 300? The county engineer is saying it's okay. I mean, that's the whole reason we have zoning standards is public health, safety, and engineer's office.
Oh, you do say subject to the approval of Delaware County Engineer.
Correct. My thought on that was, does that mean you can go below 300, or does it mean we say 300, but if the engineer's office says you got to be at 350, you're going to have to be at 350? I felt like it was gray enough that maybe we just wanted to add that clarification saying, unless you want them to ask for that divergence, of course. I've tried to get away from making them to ask for divergences when it's something some other agencies
Oh, you
require.
say this is the
We,
minimum.
but we put that in there for a
But then
very
you say-
specific reason.
The 300 feet?
Yeah.
Yes, it's based off the engineer's office number. So what if the engineer's office would let them go down to 295?
But didn't we just put
Well,
this in
but that
for?
came to a big, I don't know, are we allowed to talk? We can't specifically call that one out, right?
But, no, but I understand what you're saying. It has been a topic of discussion
It's been a
before.
topic of discussion because of how close it was, and we said it had to be separated because it was a runaround of complying with the dual entry piece.
So in the alternative, we could make some sort of clarification that basically said, let me look at how exactly it reads. 302B.
If we would lessen that distance, then I'd worry about us having to reword.
Well, I guess we don't need to leave it at
Access.
any clarification, I guess to Mr. Wester's point. It's 300 feet, but your distance still has to be subject to the engineer's approval. I guess if the engineer lets you go less than 300 feet, that's fine, but our code says 300 feet.
So you have to.
You would have to ask for a divergence at that point.
Okay.
So if that's just the way you want to enforce it, that's fine. I don't know if you want to necessarily say that, or if you think the existing language is sufficient to know that.
Because if they ask for a divergence and they prove, hey, I got approval from Delaware County, I'm good, and then.
Well, and that's a good point. If they were less than 300 feet, my hope would be that they have documentation
Yeah.
from the engineer's office as part of their justification for the divergence request, that
Yeah.
the engineer's office is allowing me this. And then you could take that into consideration and still make it your call.
Leave it alone.
Okay, will do.
Next.
Do you think 120310C and 130310C,
Similar.
will it cover drive aisles? No, but we regulate drive aisles or parking and drive aisles in 19. And like I put in the comment there, I do think there's an opportunity to improve the table. So the code isn't really clear of how wide is your drive aisle supposed to be if there's no parking spaces along it, if it's just a drive aisle. We talk about what the drive aisle needs to be if it's 90-degree parking spaces or 45-degree parking spaces. But what if it's a two-way drive aisle with no parking spaces along it? What's the required width? I'm not sure we really have that. Or what if it's a one-way drive aisle with no parking spaces along it? You would think you would want a required width. So I think we ought to clarify it.
Sure.
So I'll find out what those minimum numbers probably should be. My guess is 10 and 20 would be my guess, subject to fire department approval, because they got to be able to get the truck through there.
Okay.
So, I mean, I know for like urbanized streets, that's always the minimum width they will let you go down to is 10 feet per lane, 20 feet. So. 140501, need a provision for lots that go to the center line. I don't think this is an issue because we very much have never recognized a lot going to the center line of a road. If there's a right-of-way there, that part of your lot, regardless of what your deed says, we do not, for zoning purposes, we do not count that as part of your lot. You don't really own it. If you're paying taxes on it, that's between you and the auditor's office. But for zoning purposes, we've always said your front lot line is where the right-of-way line is. If you don't have a right-of-way line, it's the roadway easement line. If you don't have a roadway easement line, we're modifying this amendment says we're going to consider it where the edge of the pavement is, because we do have like one neighborhood where it's like, the road's there, it's not a right, like, there's never really been an officially dedicated right-of-way, we're not even sure there's an easement, but there clearly is a road there and it's being used for public purpose. So, I think it's a non-issue for me. We don't count these, when we look at minimum acre, when someone wants to do a subdivision, it's a 2-acre lot minimum, I would never count any of that portion in a right-of-way towards that 2 acres. That's just not how we do it. Some other townships might, but that's not how we do it. Part B of that was front setbacks seem excessive for PRDs. In essence, I think RPC misunderstood the regulation. I think they were reading it backwards, essentially. I was saying, no, what this says is if you're building a PCF, if your parcel's next to a PRD, your front setback is 75 feet. I think they were reading it in reverse. I was like, no, that's not the case. So I don't think we need to do anything there. I'm just gonna keep rolling unless you want me to stop. 1702, this was just a long sort of, there really wasn't anything to fix, more of an observation. Basically about how long part of Article 17 is and how many uses we have and sort of the approach we took. And I think we all know why we sort of did it the way we did. I spelled it out there in my response to you guys. You know, there is some concern about, is it gonna be too convoluted? Is it gonna make the document too long? I'm never terribly concerned about making the document too long. Document's length is gonna be what it needs to be, in my opinion. Some people say it should never be longer than 200 pages. I feel like it should never be longer than it needs to be. I guess is sort of my approach. More complex townships, more urbanized townships, your resolution is gonna be longer than a rural township that doesn't see anything. So it's really gonna be up to the commission to determine, do you feel like we have too many uses? Do you feel like we have too many subsections? If there's stuff you wanna consolidate? Obviously, if we drop a use, we're not gonna regulate it, and we might not have rules on the books for it if it comes. I am always, you know, sort of more of the Boy Scout approach of like, we're gonna prepare for everything. Even if it's 0.01% chance it's gonna happen, we're gonna have something on the books for it, because it's our job to be prepared and have those regs on the books.
Honestly, I think it's helpful because it leaves ambiguity out of it. If I'm working with some, client who wants to build use X, it's nice to be able to go into the zoning ordinance, look up use X and see what do I have to comply with, rather than, well, it is kind of a cemetery, kind of a nursing care, kind of a, and you don't know where it fits. And then you end up having to bother you all the time and then come sit in front of us. If we have the clear distinction, I think it's helpful.
I'm with you.
I mean, that's obviously where I landed ultimately, because that's how I drafted it, but
Right.
Joe, you put time into it too.
a lot of time. This was years. Every quiet moment I had, I'd turn to this and start fiddling with it. I appreciate the feedback, and especially because I know you look at these types of documents all the time, so you have a great familiarity probably from the other end of how it's being read and looked at.
It also makes our job easier as a commission because we know what we know what we're regulating.
I do have a punch, there's a couple more items in this list. Chairman Leff, I don't know if you saw your email. I did send a couple more things I possibly wanted to talk about, so once I get through this, if you don't mind, I'll bring them up just to sort of get some initial feedback. But, okay, so we're not gonna do anything there. One of my items in my punch list is a little bit related to that comment, though, so just prepping you for that. 17-1809, we use some phrase 15 times. This is sort of in line with sort of the previous comment. As much as I hate repeating lines over and over, to me, when you're looking at a use in a vacuum, I don't wanna assume you're gonna know that there's other regulations that exist. So I'm trying the best I can to put in when it's a likely scenario, like in this case, that's the word swimming pool. Anytime I thought the use had the likely potential that maybe there could be a swimming pool component, informing the reader, if you were looking at that section in a vacuum, oh, there's additional rules for swimming pools I need to be aware of, and they've told me where to find them.
It's also a defined term.
Yes.
So you have to use swimming pool because it is the way we've defined it in the terms.
Does that mean, just because I didn't say that phrase in one of those uses, that you don't have to comply with the swimming pool standards? No, and we have language in there that basically says,
Yes.
you have to comply with all the standards, whether we basically listed them explicitly or not. But I really tried, like with swimming pools, to put them wherever and a couple other things, wherever I thought they were most likely to potentially pop up.
Good.
So it does elongate thing, or, make the document longer, seem repetitive. But my thought process also was, no one other than us, when we're putting this together, is ever gonna read that entirety of that section in one sitting. You're gonna do sort of what Mr. Tysman said. You're gonna look for the standards for, I don't know, one we got pulled up on the screen there. Biomass.
Sexually oriented businesses.
Yeah, and you're gonna go to just that section. You're only gonna read that section. You don't care what it says about amphitheaters, because you're not building an amphitheater. And it's the same thing with homeowners, because one of the sort of critiques was, well, it could be really confusing for like an average resident person. The average resident is not going to be in this article at all, unless they're proposing a sexually oriented business. Their deck or shed is not going to trigger anything in this article. And even if it did, they're only going to be looking at one small section of it, not the entirety of it. So that's sort of my theory is, You know, it might look daunting to a resident when you slam the whole book down and you can say, yeah, but only about this much of all of that is gonna be pertain to you. The rest of this is a whole bunch of other stuff you don't need to worry about. 1732, apparently there's multiple classes of composting. They weren't sure if we needed to get down into the weeds on that. I didn't think that was necessary. I just recommended maybe adding the standard citation to 170205 to just sort of give people a heads up and denote the potential ag exemption in the use table.
That is so regulated by the EPA
Yeah,
in both the federal and the state level to get a level of class 1, 2, or 3 composting facility,
yeah,
that there is no reason for us to have any.
yeah, there's, and it don't, and then that is, it's not gonna matter what we say, because
Not
they're
put
gonna
it
have
in
to do whatever the
place.
state
They
says, right?
cannot put it in place without the permit, and
Yeah.
I would highly recommend we not change anything on that because of.
But I would like to put in that citation to 170205 that says you have to have all your license and permits and they have to be up to date. Because I didn't realize, I mean, it makes sense, but I didn't realize you had to have specific permits for certain composting types, so.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of distance requirements and
Yeah.
other things, and because we sit in the Hoover watershed, most of the county is probably not even
Correct.
possible, so.
Yeah. Regarding the donation bin, 1741, in essence, I didn't think it was necessary. We already addressed them under the term outdoor collection as a distinctive term and have different standards for them. So I don't know if you, unless you wanted to wrap them in as recommended here, but my guess is they didn't realize that what they were talking about was covered under outdoor collection. 1742I, or 1, I'm not sure. This phrase shows up 56 times, same response as the swimming pool thing above. I think that just sort of is what it is. 174601, there's some discrepancy in the numbers between the definition and what we have here. I think they're correct, so I suggested changing the verbiage in 174601 from the number 3 to number 4 to match the definition. 220402,
What does 3 qualify as then?
triplex, I think we call that a
So
triplex.
duplex, triplex, and then row?
Yeah, I believe so.
So does that require a change in definition section?
No, what we're doing is changing 174601 to match the definition. The definition for row dwelling said it was X, and we were, or 4, and we were saying in this section you could do 3.
That says no less than 3.
Yeah, we have for dwellings, row dwellings, single family, and you get to all the multi-family building, multiplex, duplex, triplex. We actually have a fourplex for multifamily buildings, but a row dwelling would be exactly what it sounds like. They're basically townhouses in a row as opposed to like a square building where you go in a hallway and there's 4 units inside that one building. Or you see those quads, you know, they're not getting built as much anymore, but like in the early 2000s, those quad arrangements were all the rage there for a while. 220402C, blah, 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 just a grammatical change, gonna make, same with 271004A, grammatical change, I'll make. That concludes the RPC comments. So with the few other items that popped up, you know, I didn't want to keep throwing items in there that popped up, because I mean, I know at some point we're gonna have to just draw the line in the sand and say, we're not putting anything else in here. If anything else comes up, it'll just have to wait. I just wanted to run these items by you to see, is this something you want to cover now, before we've initiated, and while I'm gonna make some other changes, or do you want me to just hold off and keep them on a list somewhere for later? And a lot of this comes from zoning permits reviews. I've been doing more of them lately, because we've got Susan focusing on some other things, so I've picked up some more permit reviews, and as I'm looking at the permits, I'm seeing things that I'm like, oh, wow, we could change the code here, or we need clarification here, so. And the types of decks and patios we're seeing, I mean, it's great that they're so fancy and elaborate, but it's introducing new complexities that we never really had to deal with before. So, or we were just sort of dealing with and sort of just interpreting, but it probably would be good to document somewhere without us just sort of making a staff interpretation. Number one, do we need to have an exemption or some sort of clarification regarding deck heights? If the deck is attached to or immediately adjacent to a structure. If we consider them an accessory structure, they technically should be no taller than 12 feet in height from the very bottom to the top of the rail. But if they are just considered an extension of the home, they would be entitled up to the 35 plus feet. 35 feet seems tall, however, I'm almost certain I could go around and find decks on these larger homes that are taller than 12 feet from the base to the railing. I mean, 12 feet's barely a story. So if you've got a second-story deck with a railing, you're probably above 12 feet anyway, on a relatively modest home.
Or if you're in a walkout basement. Right.
Yes, and that's where we would see it a lot.
Right.
So, is that something you think I need to add some clarification on in the code? I mean, it would help staff. It's not something you guys are really ever gonna have to deal with, but it could help staff.
What's your proposal?
I would think we would probably need to tweak the language just to make, again, provide a clarification.
So is there a maximum then that you're gonna put on it?
I mean, the maximum ultimately,
Well, I mean, if you put.
you can't exceed the principal building height.
Can't exceed the height.
Well,
So-
yeah, obviously. But, I mean,
That
is
would be
the-
the,
is
that would be my
Is
recommendation.
that the max?
Because,
Yeah.
I mean, even think, not that, I'm not gonna say never, but think about, you go to North Carolina, a beach house.
Mhm.
They've all got decks on the roofs, because everyone wants to see the ocean.
But Widows Peak up there.
Is that part of your principal home, though? Or is that an addition, is that a different structure? So I would argue if like it was on your roof, I'd say, well, that's part of your principal home. The 35, as long as it's under 35 feet, if you want to put a deck on top of your house, as long as in total, when I measure the top of that railing, you haven't exceeded 35 feet, I'm probably going to be inclined to say yes.
Okay, that's fine.
So that would be my recommendation, is just clarifying a little bit.
Okay.
I'm trying to eliminate opportunities for, you know, problems, loopholes.
Putting a deck tower on top of your house.
Yeah.
Can't exceed 35 feet in principal structure, so,
Oh, yeah. But otherwise?
yeah. They can't do a Widows Peak, actually. It's okay.
Well, we know the building code at some point is going to come into play, obviously, with a lot of that too. Clarification, number two was, do we need, clarification regarding whether patio space under a deck is considered a building? Because we've always been very strict on what's considered a building, because our concern has always been, you build a porch, because this is what I always have, they build the porch, or a patio, it's a nice patio. Oh, well, now we want a roof part of it. Okay, well, number one, we've always considered that an extension of your principal building, because what you then could do, once you build that is, oh, no, well, now I want to wall it in and make it a three-season room. At that point, you don't have to pull a zoning permit, because you're not expanding the footprint. All you got to do is go to the building department and say, hey, I'm going to modify this and put walls around it. So we've always considered anything with a roof over it a building, because even if it's basically open air underneath, because it has the potential to become, and it's, by definition, it meets the definition of a building. But we've always rubbed in some rub with that. What if it's a pergola roof? Is that a building?
I mean, is this a roof and walls then?
What if it's like a gazebo, or like it's just posts with a solid roof? Like if it has posts and a solid roof, I would consider that
But
a
if
building.
it's open to the air, then it's not part of your interior. I mean, from the moment you make it interior and you put walls and a roof on it, is that not what defines it?
So what the code basically says, if you got something that's covered by a roof, that's supported by posts and or walls, you're a building. You're not a structure. You are a structure, but you're also a building.
What does the word building trigger? By
Um,
classifying it as a
if
building, what
you're-
does that mean?
If it's like if it's a building, number one, if it's an extension of the principal dwelling, you are now subject to the principal building setbacks for that lot.
Right.
If it's an accessory building, you're only subject to the accessory building setbacks, which are more lenient, obviously. But to the same degree, we have a max number of accessory buildings you're allowed on a property as well. So people can't start, dotting properties with, and it's a bit of a ratio. So obviously, the larger property you are, the more you get. I guess our my preference here would be, we would just clarify that if it's patio space that's under a deck that isn't otherwise walled in, is not considered a building. That, I guess that's what I'm driving at here, is we would like that clarification, because I just reviewed a permit like that yesterday. They're replacing the deck, and it's a walkout, under the deck is a walkout, so they want patio space there. And the deck is high enough to do it, so it's like, is that really a building? If it's, all you've got above you is a deck. And then I thought, well, maybe if it's just, we just say, well, it would have to be a solid roof. But then I thought, well, there are technically decks that are solid. I mean, you could put a solid, it's not a wood deck, I mean, you could put a solid floor deck in. So I thought, well, that doesn't work. So I guess that's my recommendation. Are you okay with me putting some sort of clarification there?
Doesn't the use determine its definition? If it's an outdoor space that's either enclosed or not enclosed, but let's say a walkout with an outdoor kitchen, that's still an outdoor, it's not built into the house. It's still a patio. So how does that differ from what you're asking us to give you guidance on?
I think it's, and that's why I throw the caveat that if it's under a deck and has walls, then I would consider it a building, because then it becomes very easy to wall that in as part of the principal building. And I'm looking at the architects in the room
The
for
only
your
thing that-
expertise.
The only thing, like, what if you talk about like a space that's still open, like you get those mosquito nettings kind of thing, it's also kind of walled in, but it's still like in outside space, what do you call that?
Exactly.
Like a
You
screen
get-
porch kind of, is that then in or out? I mean, in my opinion, it's out, but, I mean, you could basically sit there all summer and it could be an extension of your home, but.
If you put up netting, I don't think we would consider that walls, but if you have something that's,
I mean, I've just seen some that are like really ornate, like that have walls with nice posts in there. It's all like, there's nice benches built in there. It's almost inside, but it's not.
exactly, so that's what we're talking about, is those hybrid type of situations where it's like, you put a little extra work into this, and this is gonna be actually a part of the house. Or what if you build like a wall up to here, then from here to here, you've got 3 season shades or something,
Yeah.
or like those all-weather shades like restaurants have, where it's an outdoor patio, but then in the winter, they can pull those vinyl things down and they heat it, and you can sit out there in winter, even though you're outdoors, but you're not really outdoors. That's why we've always treated it as buildings, because it's so easy to quickly do that. So I guess that's why I was trying to recommend, maybe we say a patio space under a deck isn't necessarily a building unless you start putting up walls around its foundation under the deck, and now you've started to create something else. That's really not a patio. Now you're sort of building an enclosed space. It's less, you're still outdoors, but you're starting to formalize it a little bit more. Or we can just leave it as is, and I'll take it on a case-by-case basis, and hopefully no one challenges me on what we decide, but.
Is this how you formulate it? Is this the question?
Because like, I don't want to make it too difficult and technical, but to the same degree, I feel like we ought to have something on the books, because this is not an abnormal occurrence. I mean, we can all probably find houses in our neighborhoods that probably have this.
So you have something in mind you would like to?
Yeah, basically, a patio under a deck isn't necessarily considered a building unless there's walls erected around it of,
Says it's modified, so.
Could you say unless it's enclosed by permanent walls?
yeah, we could just say
Oh, yeah,
something like that.
that's good.
Yeah, I think that's where I was leaning, is it temporary or is it a permanent wall? When you mentioned like the restaurants, those are just temporary.
Some of them are. Some of them have walls that go up here. It's temporary from here to here, but then there's solid walls from
But
here
it's
to
still
here.
a knee wall,
Yeah.
a sitting wall. I've got one on my own patio.
Well, sitting walls is actually one of the next items on the list. Because that's come up too. So this, actually, I'll bring that up since it's sort of related. Actually, it is the very next item on the list. We've been seeing a lot of patio proposals with seating walls. We generally don't require a zoning permit for a patio unless it's elevated more than a foot from the ground, but we have been making people get permits if there are seating walls, since they are a vertical element. Staff's thought is that it may make sense to exempt an otherwise non-elevated patio wall with seating walls less than maybe a certain height. Like if you're building a seating wall and it's only this far off the ground, 2 feet is the number that jumped out to me. If you're building a wall that's 2 feet or less, do we really want to make people pull a permit for that?
Seating walls, 18, isn't it?
Usually, yeah.
Seating walls 30, knee walls 18.
30?
Yeah, what are you saying? It's gotta be 30.
Usually,
30 is table height.
If you can be,
30 is table height. Seating height is 18, I thought.
18 or is it 24?
usually 18.
Is it? Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
But I could see 24 working too, if you want to have something that's a little bit higher.
Yeah. So that was my thought of, like, if the patio's otherwise flush with the ground, and they just want to put some seating walls around the perimeter, is there a certain threshold where we say if it's under, if those walls are under a certain height, we're not gonna make you pull a permit because,
So right now, patio.
because you could go out and buy basically paver stones at Home Depot and stack up 2 feet of paver stones around your garden for the same
Right,
effect.
but patio is a foot. So if we don't say 24, so we're 3 foot in height
Yeah.
from ground.
Mhm. Well, we're saying if it's just a flat patio and has a seating wall. Now, I could throw that caveat in there that maybe, you know, the elevation plus seating wall shall not exceed 36 inches. We could say that too. I just feel like anything under 36 inches is so like
Yeah.
short and de minimis. It's like, why are we, like I
Right.
said, you go to Home Depot and build that on a weekend.
So 30, you have to clarify that it's 36, including all structure or knee wall or
Okay.
however you're gonna say it.
So max 36 inch for everything with the caveat that the seating walls can't exceed 24?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want me to use that same type of thought with the patio discussion before in terms of the height of any walls that someone would put around a patio under a deck? Or do you think those will just work in concert with one another already?
What about your corner pillars?
No,
What's the standard height for those?
there isn't. But that would all be inclusive into this. We would say a max number.
I would say 48 then, right? For a corner pillar or a standalone pillar encompassed in the wall.
Then at that point, they'd have to get a permit.
I guess if we make this edit with the seating wall and the 36-inch max, that doesn't mean you, yeah, no, that doesn't work the way I thought it was gonna work.
How many of those do you see? You said you see a lot of applications.
I just did one with a patio under a deck this week, or last week.
No, sorry, I was talking
Um,
about the.
Seating walls?
Seating wall with.
Those are
With the
very,
pillars, but with the pillars that are 4 feet.
that I don't know, I'd have to go back and look. The seating walls are common.
So I would be okay if they want to do those pillars, that they need to apply for zoning, since they seem to be rare. If
Could
they're
also
4
put a
feet.
structure on top of a pillar, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
You could put a,
I didn't think about the pillars, to be
Well,
honest.
most times when they're gonna put a structure like a pergola or something along that, the posts go in first, and then you build around it.
Correct.
So when it's built up, 48 inches really isn't all that much higher than your seating wall right next to it. It's 12
Mhm.
inches. It's where you put your elbow and your drink.
Mhm.
You'd have to pull a permit for putting a structure up.
Well, what I can do is I can, based on this conversation, I'll put some stuff in there. I'll try to itemize, here's where I put all the edits. And then when I send the next revision out to you guys, you'll have that specific list to know to go look at those certain sections and see if you think what's there works or if we need to elaborate on it more. Item 4, I only have this and one other thing on my list. We allow certain improvements to encroach up to 10 feet into required setbacks under current section 160802 in the current code. We were wondering if this exemption shouldn't also include non-elevated patios, which might have retaining walls and/or seating walls. We're also thinking of adding the words immediately adjacent after the word attached in that section to again provide greater clarity, because most patios aren't physically attached to the house. They're immediately adjacent to the house, but obviously they're not, there's no physical structure tying it to the house. So I guess my recommendation is we make that clarification that if your patio is immediately adjacent to your house, we are going to allow for that 10-foot encroachment kind of thing. If it requires a permit. If you don't require a permit, then you're golden. But- And I think we were just talking about, yeah. So guys, so Paul, do you have 160802 up? Yeah, so you can see it there. It says deck, steps, elevated patios, awnings, balconies, and other similar types of incidental structures. So we don't call them accessory structures, we call them incidental structures, which are attached to a principal building, may extend into the required front and rear yard, a minimum of 10 feet. Detached iterations obviously shall comply with the accessory provisions below.
Attached or immediately adjacent, that's your proposed revision?
And adding patios, or non-elevated patios, I guess, to the list.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
All right, will do. And then back to sort of the discussion about Article 17. Do you want me to see if there's any way we could consolidate some uses and/or of those sections, or do you want to just leave it as is and you're happy with it? Because I was like, the example was, we have a section for amusement parks and amusement resorts. Theoretically, I could probably combine that in one section that says amusement parks and resorts, and then break each of those uses further down in that one section, and it reduces section numbers by one in the code. I might be able to eliminate some repetitive language. But if it's not a concern to you, it's not a concern to me.
Unless somebody has real heartburn over that one.
And there might be other examples, but I didn't want to take the time to go through it without the board or the commission saying they were interested. What's that?
I feel like you always have to start again then, because there's probably a whole bunch you can put back together then. You did so much work to spread them out.
No,
Yeah,
I'd keep them spread out.
got it. So that was everything on my list to date that has come up since we did this. The legal review came back pretty clean, actually, other than, the only thing Pete called out was in the PRD section, can you go to 9, Paul? I can't remember the exact number. Let me find it real quick. It was 90403. New 90403. So it's that highlight there at the end. So Pete basically suggests, Peter Griggs, the attorney, basically suggested, do you want to cap the number of vehicles that may be permitted? So basically, someone doesn't start keeping a fleet of vehicles on their lot. So I was like, yeah, that makes sense to me. I came up with the number 2. I felt like 2 is reasonable. If you got 2 adults living in the house, you both have one of those vehicles, that's fine. 3 starts to seem a little excessive. So,
If, is this able to be applied for a divergence? So if some rare instance, somebody's daughter, and everybody works for the cleaning company, and we've all got 3 cleaning Kias, could they apply for a divergence to get?
technically, yes. But I doubt at the development plan stage, anyone would know that this situation was going to occur.
Right.
Unless they specifically wanted to design the development to allow that, that was their thing, that's who their market base was.
Right.
Which seems like unlikely. What typically happens in these development plans is if someone can't meet the code, and the development plan's already been approved, they can ask for a variance as long as the variance only impacts their lot.
Right, okay.
We've had situations, Sheffield Park being one of them, where they wanted to get rid of the no disturb line behind their property. But they wanted to remove it from all the properties. And I said, well, we're not going to remove it from one property. If we're going to do it, we have to do the whole stretch. That's not a variance at that point because you're modifying the development plan. They did get everyone signed on with it and they actually got it done. But that's what would happen in this instance. If you had someone who wanted to do that, they'd have to go to the BZA and ask for a variance for it.
Yeah, but you also have bylaws and governance on
Correct.
HOAs, and if you're doing a PRD, then you're in that anyway, so.
And there's probably HOAs that don't allow any of them
Correct.
in your driveway.
If
Genoa used to
If
enforce
only
that.
we actually enforced
Actually.
those things.
That's up to the HOAs. Genoa actually used to be that strict and say you couldn't have them at all. And when I got here, I was like, that is not very reasonable.
So I think 2 is fine.
Okay.
Allow the HOAs to.
Yeah, I thought that was a reasonable number.
Yeah.
So that was the only really thing that came out of the legal review. He was very complimentary of all the work the commission's done to put this together. I think he even said he was gonna steal some of our language, at some point. He did flag, there's the section that talks about like when the zoning lines aren't clear, you know, how it would be interpreted. He's like, that could be a matter that ends up in course, but he goes, my recommendation is keep what you wrote, because I think it's good. And you just cross that bridge if you ever come to it, but, so he was comfortable with what we had there, so.
What's our next step? You have to add this stuff and then.
So I'll have to make these edits. This shouldn't take too long. We didn't do anything too crazy. And I don't have, you know, a lot of applications to review for November, so I don't think it's unreasonable for me to get something to you before the November meeting. I'll try to shoot for a week about ahead. Because this is what, maybe a dozen edits we just talked about.
Yep.
Roundabout number. I'll try to punch list them all out for you in like a list, so you know, you don't have to read through the whole thing. You can just jump to those certain items and see if they make sense to you.
All right, so that version and then a clean, non-red line version.
Okay,
2 versions to review.
yep.
See if we have any addition, final, anything, and then if we've got nothing, then we would do the initiation at that point.
Yeah, that'll be up to you whether or not you feel like you want to do the initiation in November, or if you need a little more time to read through everything and post, and not do it until December, January. That's sort of a you decision. Whatever the commission's
We
comfortable
can
with.
gauge that at the meeting, depending on if anybody's got any comments. Go from there.
We're not obligated to any time clocks yet, so you can take as long as you need. The board isn't asking where is it yet, so they know you're working on it.
All right. Are we done talking about that piece?
I didn't have anything else for you unless you
Any
do.
public comment? Seeing none. Anybody got anything else? Any other new business? What are we looking for next week or next month?
No, like I said, you have one application on your November agenda. It's a rezoning application, a relatively simple one, because it involves just going to a straight district. So I think I told you the board, I just mentioned the board approved Olive Branch, they approved Northgate. I can't really think of anything else that I haven't already told you.
Okay. Next meeting is Tuesday, November the 12th, here in the Township Hall at 7 PM. Do we have a motion?
I move to adjourn this meeting at 8:38 PM.
I second that motion.
All in favor? Aye,
Aye.
opposed? Meeting over, 8:38 PM.